I can do all things through him who gives me strength. It's a verse that millions and millions of people know by heart. Probably many of you consider it one of your favorite verses. And you know how I know this? If you Google Phillippians 4:13 tattoos, you will find many, many examples. I'm not going to put any up on the screen for you right now. You'll just have to trust me on that. But if you try a search for Philippians 4:12 tattoos, you're not going to get too many. Here's what it says. I know what it is to have little, and I know what it is to have plenty. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being well fed and of going hungry, of having plenty and being in need. So you have plenty of hits on tattoos for 4:13. You have almost no hits on tattoos for 4:12. And yet, I really don't think that it's possible to divorce one from the other. So reading the Bible and reading it well is all about context. It's about understanding what else is around that particular verse that you're looking at. And tattoos are hardly a place for context, right? I mean, you can't footnote a tattoo. It's just a little too painful and too expensive. Remember when we first started this series, that one of the things I said I hope that we would be able to do was to understand how it is that Paul could write a letter like this. Because something so beautiful, something so hopeful, coming from this place where he is in prison and he's awaiting what eventually would be a death sentence, that's a striking thing for us. And so you remember the first week I said it had something to do with remembering, that revisiting particular moments with particular people in our lives is one of the things that enables us to live out of gratitude. When we can look back and give thanks for all the good that has brought us up to that place. That's one of the things that helps us to live out of gratitude. And the next week then, Kathleen talked about humility, about having the mind of Christ, about serving others as a way of finding joy regardless of our circumstances. And then last week, we talked about how the Christian life always is looking forward. The idea that sometimes we have to give up even that which we find to be one of the something that's very valuable and very good to us, and to embrace something that's even better that God has in store for us. So it seems to me what we've actually been talking about over the past few weeks on some level is focus. Where's our focus? Rejoice, Paul says in this passage. Don't worry, rejoice. Things in life that are true, that are honorable, that are just, that are pure, that are excellent, think on these things. And that's the title of the series, right? Think on these things. Don't dwell on the negative. Don't dwell on the fear and the doubt and the evil that people do to one another or even to you. Instead, whatever you can find that is worthy of praise, then think on these things. Now, Paul has found one thing, one life, more than any other, worthy of praise. And that's the life of Jesus, of course. And that's his focus throughout his letter. He's talking about how Jesus' life gives him the opportunity to understand how he's supposed to live. Now, granted, he does slip a little in pointing to himself, as he sometimes does. He says, imitate what you've seen in my life in this passage. Imitate what you've seen in my life. And I always feel a little self-conscious when I read that verse aloud. I always want to footnote it, right? To say, listen, that's Paul talking, that's not me, right? And that's the problem, I think, with Philippians 4:13. That's the problem with I can do all things through him who strengthens me, is because if you want to talk about focus, too often with this, we're a little out of focus. Our focus shifts instead of to being on him, it's on me. Our focus is on the last word of the sentence, and not the most important word in the sentence, which is him. And so the result is lots of terrible tattoos of this verse that Ben Witherington, who is a scholar, a New Testament scholar at Asbury Seminary, he calls it the Superman verse. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. And it's a favorite for athletes in particular. If you Google Philippians 4:13 posters, you'll see things that probably belong like on a locker room wall that have pictures of footballs and the football field. And you remember Tim Tebow, of course, right? I don't know what Tim Tebow is doing now. But in the eye black under his eyes, he would put this particular scripture quote, Phillippians 4:13. I'm sure tons of Christian marathoners and Ironman triathletes and others have also looked to this particular verse as something to get them over that last hill in order to bring a race home. And I don't take anything away from that, because God knows, Jesus or no Jesus, I'm never going to run a marathon. That's just my reality. Okay? I don't expect ever to do that. So what does it say, I can do all things? What does it mean when we say that? I can do all things through him who gives me strength. So let's come back to context. Now, Paul, when he says this, he's thanking the church in Philippi for this gift that they've sent to him. So a friend has arrived named Epaphroditus. Now, you want to talk about somebody who never had a girl tattoo with that name on there, right? It doesn't really work. So Epaphroditus shows up bringing this gift from the Philippian church. And most scholars actually think that this is the primary reason why Paul writes this letter to begin with, is it's supposed to be a letter of thanksgiving. Then there's a lot of questions about, well, why does he wait until the 4th chapter to say thank you? Well, that's interesting. But I think that part of the reason why is because he wants to make sure that they understand the fact that you send me money is not what defines this relationship. It's not the most important thing to me that you send me money. There was a recognized category of friendship in the ancient world that had to do with kind of a mutual benefit between two people, like a business arrangement. And we have those same kinds of ideas now, right? There are some friendships that you have because it's mutually beneficial to you. But then, as now, it was never the highest form of friendship, right? That utilitarian kind of friendship was never the highest thing. I mean, when you go out with people maybe after work, do you go out with them in order to network, or do you go out with them because you actually like them? That's the question. Or I wonder if there's some people in your life who maybe you have derived great benefit, maybe even a small benefit, economic or otherwise, from having known them. But you know what? That's really secondary to the fact that you really like them. And so what Paul's doing here, he's going to great lengths to say, this isn't all about money. I really care about you. And that's why in this whole chapter he's trying to walk this line. He's thanking them for their generosity, but he's also emphasizing that it really wasn't necessary. I don't need the gift, he says. It's appreciated, but I don't need it. I know what it is to have little. I know what it is to have plenty. And I've learned to be content with whatever it is that I have. And when we read this and when we really understand it, we begin to realize that Philippians 4:13 is not about a locker room pep talk at halftime. It's not about completing a pass for the winning touchdown. And it's not about pushing on with your run after you've hit the wall. It's not about finishing the last 5 miles of a 100-mile ride. It's actually closer on some level to what happens when you fail at one of those things. It's actually closer to what it takes to look yourself in the mirror and say, you know what, it's okay. I didn't get done what I hoped to get done, but it's okay. Like when maybe you worked really hard for a promotion and you got passed over for it. Or maybe someone trusted you to make this pitch and you blew it. Or maybe when somebody in your family gave you a responsibility and you messed it up. When you look at yourself in the mirror and you try to find the courage to tell yourself, you know what, it's okay. God still loves me. Because it's not about striving for success. It's about finding contentment even when we've failed. And that's a recurring theme for Paul. It comes up over and over again. Not our strength, but our weakness. And you can say it a lot of ways. You can talk about God's blessing through our weakness. You can talk about giving thanks in our weakness. You can talk about experiencing contentment despite our weakness. In 2 Corinthians 12, Paul talks about, and it's a very famous passage, he talks about this thorn in his flesh. He describes this thorn, a messenger of Satan to torment me. And we don't really know what that means. What is he talking about exactly? But he does say 3 times, I prayed to the Lord to have it removed, whatever it was, to have it lifted from him. And never was it taken away. Instead, what he heard God saying to him was this: my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Now that's 2 Corinthians 12:9, which incidentally is also one that people get tattooed on themselves. Not as frequently, I would be willing to bet. So which is it? Is it I can do all things through him who strengthens me? Or is it my grace is sufficient for you, my power is made perfect in weakness? Which is it? See, as Americans, we gravitate toward I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Because we read that with the emphasis on me, not on him. I'm certain if we could do an actual inventory of tattoos in America and look at the frequency of Phillippians 4:13 versus 2 Corinthians 12:9, I bet you it'd be 20 to 1 in favor of the Philippians passage. Striving comes naturally to us. Contentment does not. So today, as we stand at the edge of Thanksgiving week, this is my question. Do we have the courage to read Philippians 4:13 as it's actually meant to be read? Do we have the courage to be able to read it in context? And that context is not the Superman verse, but as a contentment verse. I know what it is to have little, and I know what it is to have plenty. In any and all circumstances, I have learned the secret of being well-fed and going hungry, of having plenty and of being in need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Friends, think on these things. Amen.